I am recording this video on July 1st, which is the payment date for the quarterly dividend payout on SCHD. Today marks the largest dividend payout per share ever. In fact, here's my dividend payout from today. Can you guess how many shares I own in order to get this particular payment from this ETF? Comment down below with your guess. But in this video, we're going to explore why this is just the beginning, including an updated deep dive on SCHD since my last video, and a stark warning that I have for investors on buying this particular ETF. Let's get going. With today's payout, SCHD is paying its largest ever 82 cents per share and currently sitting on its yield of 3.64%. So let's say, for example, you have $77,580 invested into SCHD. That means you would hold roughly 1,000 shares. Taking 82 cents per share by 1,000 shares means that you earned $820 today in a dividend payout. And if they maintain or continue to grow that payout, that means you're going to continue to earn around $3,280 in dividend payouts per year. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's just stick to the $820 payout. You can either reinvest that $820 dividend or cash it out and treat the entire bar to a round on you. But I'd recommend the first option. But even if you think $820 isn't actually a lot of money, remember that we're also up an additional 8.72% in price return alone in the last year. But why is this just the beginning of bigger and bigger dividends in the future? Well, it's in part thanks to the most recent reconstitution of SCHD that occurred way back in March of 2024. So typically SCHD, it does this reconstitution on their holdings every year, every March. But the issue is it's been rather lackluster in my opinion as to the performance in the last few years, this dating back to 2021. But this year, however, I think they've made some big moves, reducing bigger technology and financial holdings for more dividend-focused companies that meet the core 4 requirements to truly be part of the SCHD holdings. Now, as a recap, the core 4 requirements are: Number 1, the companies have to have a positive cash flow to total debt. Number 2, a positive return on equity. Number 3, indicated dividend yield being strong. And number 4, a 5-year dividend growth rate at a minimum. Now, in a video I did back in March of 2024, I provided a number of 3.84% dividend yield projection by the end of 2024. You can see in the prior years, the average yield has ranged anywhere from 3.58 to 3.15 to 2.87, but with the year-end yields anywhere from the mid 2% range up to about 3.5%. So with a 3.8% by the end of the year, that thesis indicates the 82 cent payment will only continue to grow over time. But this is also backed by the holding. So let's take a look at my tracker here. See, here back in February of 2024, their top holding was Broadcom. And honestly, that's a little bit silly right now for a fund like that. Now, sure, it made sense maybe a while ago, but this is actually a growth stock. It's a powerful company, but its dividend yield is only 1.31%. It just grew like a beast. So compare that now with the top holding of Home Depot at 2.61 and even Cisco Systems at 3.37% dividend yield. These companies are growing their dividends and they're keeping up with the core 4 requirements. Broadcom just kind of went to the moon. But this leads us to our bigger issue, which is the warning for investors buying into SCHD. So listen up here. If you are, 1, young and don't plan on needing your portfolio or your money for a little period of time here. Number 2, you're really more interested in massive growth of your portfolio. And number 3, you're just not retired. Well, SCHD is a fine thing to have in your portfolio, but it won't be a growth machine. It just won't be. So let me show you what I mean by checking out Seeking Alpha. So if we look here at the 3-year chart, you see how SCHD is underperforming the S&P 500? We're talking about your money could have grown 27% with the S&P 500 versus SCHD's 14.75%. And this is the total return, which means the dividends are reinvested into both of these options. The point here is, if you're interested in a balance, putting all of your money, your entire portfolio into SCHD may require a checkup with your portfolio doctor. Now, if you have a long time horizon, you could be missing out on some great growth opportunity despite dividends. For example, if you compare SCHD to QQQ, the results are obviously well on the side of QQQ. So you might say to yourself, well, okay, yeah, that makes sense, but then why even invest in SCHD in the first place, unless for some reason you'd rather have dividends over a higher return? But that doesn't make sense either, right? Well, the reason why is because you still want to have balance. I'm looking at the 5-year total return. That means dividends are reinvested. And you can see right off the chart, S&P 500 at 85.63% return compared to SCHD's 74.49%. But here's what I mean by balance. And I'm going to show you two really important things alongside of this warning of don't put all your money into only dividend-paying ETFs. Balance this out, right? So look at this. If you look at what happened right here, this is the critical point right here. Now, what happened in this particular year? Well, this particular year absolutely stunk, right? This is 2022. And that was the year that the S&P 500 was negative. That's the year that we saw a lot of stocks going down. That's the year that QQQ kind of stunk as well. But look at SCHD. So if you follow along here, the blue line represents S&P 500, orange line represents SCHD. Everything's looking fine here. In fact, if we come all the way up to here, now this is at the end of 2021. SCHD is at 65% return compared to the S&P 500's 62% return. But then look what happens in 2022 as the Fed raises interest rates and the stock market has a dip. The stock market's dipping, but SCHD kind of holds its own, right? It kind of keeps itself balanced. We look here at the end of 2022, that awful year, SCHD is now at 61%. Look at the S&P 500, 30%. Now, see, if this was recorded on December 27, 2022, and you and I were having this conversation right now, we'd be saying like, yo, SCHD is like the bomb, right? But what's going to happen is year over year over year, you're going to have years that SCHD is doing what it did here, looking great. But then you're going to have years like right now where the S&P 500 is kicking butt and taking names and SCHD is just doing okay. And it brings up a concern I have, and that was concerned of everybody kind of crapping on SCHD over the last year, primarily in the late 2023 and pretty much all of 2024 so far, only because right now the S&P 500 is on a nice, beautiful boom. Balance is where it's at. So when the market's downturning, SCHD, it's feeling good. When the market's booming, SCHD is meh. But the point is, when things hit the fan, SCHD can kind of provide a little bit more of a conservative balance and a little bit more exposure into sectors that you typically don't get, because right now the S&P 500 is heavily weighted into tech stocks. QQQ is primarily all tech stocks, and you see what I'm saying. Now, in a previous video that I just did, I talked about a core satellite portfolio, and that's one that I love. And it's basically 3 funds. You could go up to 5 funds if you wanted to, but really that core satellite is you have a group of core funds, and those core funds are the S&P 500 or the total stock market. For example, VTI or VOO. Those are your core. That's the foundation of the home. That's the thing that's going to keep everything looking great. The satellite are kind of the fun little things that balance everything out. That could be where you go into SCHD. That's where you can have fun with tech. So if you're a younger person and you want to be a little bit more aggressive, but you still like SCHD, that's where you can look at maybe a 40-40-20 portfolio. And that means 40% going into something like VTI or VOO, 40% going into something like QQQ, and maybe the rest going into SCHD. And look at the power of this. I put this on the portfolio visualizer. And what we're going to look at is for the last, we're going to say from January 2015 until today, look at the difference of a $10,000 portfolio. So we're going to put $10,000 against all 3 of these things. If you only invest into SCHD, and people do this, right? Maybe you do this, but look at this. $10,000 after all those years turns into only $26,000. Okay, that's what dividends reinvested, $26,000, which is an annualized return of 10.8%. If you only went into VTI, for example, which is the total stock market fund, you would have $29,000, a little bit better. Still not great. Core satellite portfolio, which is the 40-40-20 that I just talked about, look at the difference here. Your 10,000 is 36,919. That's an annualized return of 14.74%. What really pulls that up is, of course, QQQ, but it's also balanced by SCHD. If you only did QQQ alone, of course, you're going to make the most at $49,000 or 18%. But remember, there could be a time that we have a 2022 pop up again. And if 2022 pops up again, we're going to see QQQ, NVIDIA, right? The S&P 500, VTI, all these things start going down. And the idea is SCHD kind of holds its own. It's still going to go down, but not as much. It kind of balances the portfolio. And that's what's beautiful about this. Now, some people sub out dividends for bonds, but it's really all your own. I'll let you do some research on bonds. If you do BND compared to SCHD, you'll see what I mean. The returns just don't even make sense. So applying the core satellite portfolio means that you take advantage of the growth while still enjoying 82 cents per share payout that we just got today. To learn more though about the power of that core satellite portfolio, what we need to do is check out this video next, and we'll see you on the next video.